I know, I guess, let's see, today's Tuesday. Is this a pretty hoppin' night in Ridgecrest? National Taco Day. All right. So I think you will need a mic if you're going to talk. So you want this one or you want the one next to you there? All right.
Oh, it's working.
Yeah, who are you anyway?
Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Don Zadiva. I'm General Manager in Indian Wells Valley Water District. I think I know everybody here. So welcome, glad you're here, and welcome to all those out there in TV land that are watching. So just do a brief introduction. I think most of you know the history here, but several months ago, Department of Water Resources approached the Water District about providing facilitation services, and the Board of Directors voted to accept that offer. And so we started the process of putting this whole thing together. And some of you may have attended a meeting back in May 17th. Paul Goslin with the Department of Water Resources was here, along with Lisa and Emily. And it was the purpose of the meeting was to just describe the process, how the facilitation process is going to work. So since that May 17th meeting, they've been very busy engaging with stakeholders, personal interviews, as well as conducting an online survey, which I'm sure they'll share the results of. So that's why we're here today, for them to share with you the results of the feedback that they got from many of you, as well as through those online surveys. So I won't take up any more time, but I do want to introduce again Lisa Butler and Emily Finnegan, who's back in the control booth there. She'll be handling the online audience. So turn it over to Lisa.
Very good, and we do have some website information up here. So that's, if people want to know more, you have a page on the website that allows more information. The recording from this meeting, handouts, those types of things will be on that website, correct? I'm assuming that's the case. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here once again. My name's Lisa Butler, and we'll go ahead and just hop into the conversation. So let me just check how many of you in the room have either answered a survey or have been interviewed, just so I have a sense of it. Okay, so pretty good group of you then. So I'll be really looking to all of you who participated, if we missed something, to make sure that you get that back into the room so that people are aware of it. And all of this information is the information we use to determine the best way forward in terms of seeing if there are some good options or outcomes that can come from this implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So what we're going to be doing today is we've just done some real brief introductions. A little bit later on in the discussions, we're going to have you do some self-introductions as well. You'll be introducing yourself to others. Then Paul, you talked just a little bit about what Paul had offered in terms of the facilitation support services. Then we'll jump into the stakeholder assessment purpose and the findings that we had from that. I think that's the reason almost everybody's here, and discuss that, and then talk about what it looks like moving forward. So this is a little bit of what Don was talking about. These are the services that DWR offers. That's the reason we're here right now, is through this. And these are the types of things that we can do. This handout, by the way, the PowerPoint will be available at the website. So what we did, we started back in May and did some initial talk. There was a planning committee that was formed. I'll talk about them in a minute. And sat down to say, hey, is this feasible to continue this conversation? That looked like a yes. We did the stakeholder assessment. This is our second public meeting. The first public meeting was to explain what we were doing, and this is to share the findings. Depending on what the decision is about moving forward, there would be additional public meetings for continued conversations, but that will be a decision that has not yet been made. So the planning committee were brought together to help us do a couple of things. The first thing was to develop the survey and develop the interviews. So for that, this is a group of people that helped us: the Water District, the Navy, Searles Mineral, Mojave, and Meadowbrook. They all came together. They gave us a list of names of people that we could talk to. We did additional research ourselves based on input that was received on the groundwater sustainability plan. So when comments were made, we used that, and that helped us determine who to talk to. So from there, that particular group also helped us a little bit with the questions. I want to just do a shout out. We had some help from Trona as well to help us think a little bit about what ways of framing the questions so that they would make more sense for people. So with that, we put that out. Most of you who participated saw there was like a handout, list of the questions. People could find out about it in advance. So the process itself, I talked about this a little bit the first time I was here, but we're just trying to find out what are the conditions? Are the conditions for collaboration present? Is there a way to move forward that is helpful to the stakeholders? One of the things we really don't want to do is ask people to get back into a room and have them spinning their wheels. That's just not useful for anybody. So we really need to take a look at, can this seriously happen? Can we improve the situation? Can we get to a better outcome in the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? We're also evaluating the environment that we're operating in. Are there actual conditions for collaboration? There are things that we measure for that. I'll talk about this when I talk about the assessment. Also looking at non-technical risks, and that can do with if something's done improperly, it can actually cause harm. And that's something that we want to make sure does not happen. So for example, right now there's litigation, there are other types of things going on, and we wanted to make sure that whatever was done was not going to create additional risks for any of the parties. We also want to determine if there is a decision to move forward, the best way to do that and the best way to engage people. So here's the process that we used. This is for the interviews. We were interviewing people from June into September. We developed, again, the list with the planning committee. We really were able to do a very large number of interviews in person, and I'm looking around the room, and I really appreciate all of you that came in for those interviews. But some folks we did by phone, and that was perfectly okay. From there, we started pulling together some additional information, once again, from some research. So altogether, we reached out to about 65 people, and 48 people participated in the actual interviews. Then we did this kind of gives you a sense of who it is that we talked to. And can you all see this? Is this big enough for you to see, or do you want me to read it out to you? I need some feedback. You can read it? Yeah, okay, very good. There's no need, but you can kind of get a sense of we really tried to get a wide range of people that we talked to so that we would have a full sense of the community and what was important to the community. So the survey was an additional item that we used to reach out to people who didn't get a chance to be interviewed. We asked, actually, most of you who were interviewed to help us distribute the survey. The survey was distributed on the website, the Water District's website. I think there were a couple of Facebook postings and things like that, so really a pretty wide distribution. We really had an outstanding response to the survey, and I say this from the standpoint of just kind of a cold survey where you send something out, and we had 137 people that participated in that process and really had some, once again, really great help with people doing outreach. So we said anybody who wanted to participate could, and that's kind of where they came from. Okay, so here's what we found out. Okay, the interviews tended to engage people who are already pretty well involved in the process. They were very familiar with SGMA for the most part. There's a couple of exceptions to that. We talked to some of the small mutuals, and for them, a lot of them, this was kind of new information to them, but most of the other folks that we talked to had a pretty good handle on what this was, or at least a general understanding of it. They also tended to actually be involved in some way, either in a groundwater authority process of some sort or some other type of an activity. So they were a largely very knowledgeable group of people that we talked with. The survey, though, was a little bit more interesting. For the people that we talked to, 84% identified themselves as just interested community members. 43% reported not having any involvement at all in the groundwater sustainability development. 50% said they were familiar with SGMA, they'd heard of it, but they didn't really know a lot about it. And half of them had said they'd never even heard of it until this came forward to them. So that was a really important piece of information to us because we were looking to find out how people's experiences having been engaged in the process would be different from people who were not. And we found some very, very large similarities between the two groups, so that in itself was quite informative. So we're measuring a couple of things. We're measuring the conditions for collaboration. And that has to do with experience, how much capacity a community might have, the ability, these are things that you can actually learn to be collaborative, to move forward. So how much capacity is already here in the community? And we actually found there was quite a bit of capacity. People had good experience in the past with doing things in collaborative ways. A lot of people were able to point to other things that they'd worked on. It didn't necessarily have to be a groundwater subject. It could have been something else. People were able to describe things that they'd done in the community that had been really useful and that how they'd pulled together, especially after different kinds of events. And that was really good news. That means this community knows how to get along if they want to. And that's a great piece of news. We're also looking for the other kinds of conditions that need to be favorable. So one of them has to be that all the parties are willing to participate. And so the key parties, you can't really have a good conversation. It's kind of like one hand clapping. You really need the other hand. So what we found was as we proceeded and started to move through this conversation, more and more people who hadn't been willing to be in a conversation were starting to express some interest in joining the conversation. So that is a very good sign, and that's something that we think we could leverage and continue moving with. So that's one of the things we were measuring. Another thing is that there has to be a lot of transparency and clear communication. We did find that there had been some problems in the past with that. That is something that can be fixed. And so as we were looking at that, what would be the process for fixing it? How could we do that? And those conditions were there. There were ways of getting that to happen. And we were receiving feedback from people that they were willing to participate in those types of things. We also were trying to understand what people actually knew about the situation, how much knowledge they had, and how their knowledge was impacting the way that they understood what was occurring. So we found once again, a wide range of people's understanding of SGMA based on their personal experiences with the process. We also found that people had a very wide variation in their understanding of what the actual groundwater situation was. So people were able to describe their own personal lived experience, and their lived experience may not necessarily be what they were hearing from others. And that because of this, there was a disconnect. And that was really something that caused people to maybe not have as much trust or caused them to question things when they, by their own experience, had found different types of things to be true. So this was a fairly common, I know Emily's in the booth in the back, she can hop in if she wants, but that was something that was quite interesting and pretty pervasive. So that would be an area for us as we're looking at collaboration to really start doing, you can do things like joint fact-finding, you can do ways of kind of getting at why are these variations existing, what's causing that to happen. We also have spent a lot of time explaining the process of the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. The GSP is the legal guiding document. And by the way that SGMA is designed, that will continue to be the guiding document. So there are kinds of areas that people could collaborate on are things like the ways of implementing a groundwater sustainability plan. They can collaborate on doing joint fact-finding. They can collaborate on ways of looking at an update or the kinds of things that should be considered in terms of management actions. So there is, even in the context of them being an existing groundwater sustainability plan, there are areas where people can continue to talk. So that would be something that we would be trying to determine, and that we would need to work with all of the parties to determine that. Once again, though, that has to be in the context of the fact that there is this adjudication, there's litigation, those kinds of things going on. You have to be able to separate the conversations in such a way that it doesn't create risk for other processes. Okay. So, as we went through the survey results, as we went through the information that we gathered through the interviews, there were some primary themes that were identified. They related to communications, transparency, equity, best available science, addressing the needs of the small mutuals, and other projects and management actions that should be raised again and there should be continued conversation about. So in terms of communications, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but the understanding of the information, a very interesting piece of feedback we got was people often mentioned that they'd been in a meeting, different kinds of information was being shared, but it was being shared at such a technical level that a general audience didn't necessarily even understand what was being said, or it wasn't possible for a general audience to be able to make decisions based on the kind of information that we were hearing. That's fixable. That's something that can be fixed. So that'll be something that we would want to talk about, possibly look at some options for improving that. Another thing was that there was a need for clear outreach and education so that some people found that the community itself perhaps didn't understand. I just talked to someone in the audience a little bit ago who said, gosh, we live in the desert. You know, do people actually understand the context of that and how water should be used in that? So that's just kind of general education. That would be something that could be talked about and a community could collaborate about the best way to do that. Another thing would be a desire for regional and statewide conversations so that people understood how what was going on here related to what was happening elsewhere and that they could compare or contrast that. Those are things that are really doable. There was also an interest, I think something that was really important in the conversations. There was a deep appreciation for the presence of the Navy in the community. People felt that it was very important that the Navy have a successful outcome here. It's a very important part of the community, and so they often were asserting how important that conversation was, and they wanted that conversation to continue. So on the technical side, there can be some ways of discussing technical information that probably could be a little bit more useful, and then helping people understand their actual, like groundwater monitoring and those types of things that would lend to more education. So there are things that could be done with the community that would allow the community to move forward. On transparency, one of the things that we found was people did not necessarily find the ways that things were occurring to be something that was really readily apparent to them. They didn't necessarily understand the processes. When people perceive a lack of transparency, a lot of times that can lead to trust issues. And so we were able to pick up some of that in terms of the survey results as well as the assessment and the interviews. So once again, these are things that can be fixed. These are things that can be worked on. Also, people having some difficulty understanding the GSP financing and the way that different funds were being expended. There wasn't a lot of clarity about that among the audience. Interestingly enough, I think the people that were doing the work actually felt like they had been transparent, that they were sharing information. So there was a gap there, but that's something that can be fixed. Gaps can be fixed. Okay. Governance. Do I understand how or why a decision was made? These are processes, government processes. If you're not a meeting junkie, this is not necessarily something you know or understand. Sometimes the processes themselves can be a little bit off-putting. We were having a conversation just a few minutes ago about having to line up, 3 deep or 4 deep to come talk at a podium, and how that can really be something that's a barrier for participation. Not everybody's even comfortable getting up and talking in front of a group like this. So what can we do to make that work better for people? And some other types of things, the way records are kept, where they are, There was also one other idea that was put on the table. This would really require quite a bit more conversation, but people had heard about something called management areas, and that's something that can be done in groundwater management. It was just an idea that was thrown out there that could be explored, for example. So equity, this really popped out. There are some communities here that are in a difficult strait for a variety of reasons, and because of that, the water issues are particularly severe for them. There are other kinds of options that are available, other agencies that can help with processes like that. So there would be room for a conversation about what can be done to support these communities that really need the additional assistance. And a lot of these communities perceived that their just existence was pretty dependent on some of this stuff getting fixed, and that there could be really dramatic consequences for the larger community if for some reason there was a failure. So we wanted to keep that on the table and keep it front and center. Best available science. We mentioned this a little bit ago. One of the things that we found was historically, and those of you, I think almost everybody in the room here knows this, maybe not so much the folks online, but there has been some dueling science. They were two particular practitioners named by name, and people both referenced them, and the fact that they were in a continuous argument. And that kind of seemed to roll forward into the larger conversations. Once again, there are processes that can be done. There are things that can be done to help resolve dueling science and make that more transparent to the public. So that would be an area potentially that could be open for further conversation. Clarity about the projected water use and future demand. Not well understood in the community. That's probably an area where a little bit more communication could be useful. Finding a way for more public conversations. And then finally, also the expansion of well monitoring and networks so people had more information about what was physically happening on the ground. So it's a lot of stuff. So I'm hoping that already you can see where there's places for conversations. In terms of addressing the needs of small mutuals, for the folks that we spoke to in the small mutual community, this just kind of hit them up the side of the head, and they really weren't prepared for it. So we probably would want to take a look at what could be done in terms of changing that dynamic a little bit and sorting that out. That's not something we can fix here. That is something that we could talk to the Groundwater Authority about. And then another area that people were really interested in talking about were additional management options. So the primary management option right now that is the focus of the Groundwater Authority has been the import of water. That is certainly something that many people felt would be an important thing to look at. However, there were many other things that people said, hey, we could put these other things on the table, and maybe we need to do all of the above, not just some or this or that. So a little more conversation around that. As you can see, here are some of the topics that people raised as potential conversation areas. So I have been talking a mile a minute. I'm going to stop. We want to check and see, does anybody... First thing I want to do is just questions. Does anybody have questions about something I've said so far? And if you have, just kind of raise your hand, let me know. Let's see does anybody have a question? Hopefully it was clear. So I'm not seeing any questions. For all of you who participated in this process, one of the things that we asked you to do is if we missed something, if we forgot something, if we misunderstood it, we asked you to correct us. Does anyone want to do that? Offer a correction? Yes. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
My name is Michael Neal, and I believe that I addressed this in a survey, pointed this out, and this is something from before the Groundwater Authority was even formed that I was addressing. Sorry? Close enough? Got it? Okay. Anyway, And there are a number of people in this valley who feel misrepresented or not represented because they have 5 members on the GA board. 3 are from the local area. 1 is from Inyo County, who has maybe 5 constituents in this basin. San Bernardino's, a little different. They've got several hundred, and they're they have valid concerns, but it's just a self-appointed board. And many people, and I mean myself, like I said, from day one, have said we don't want to give over taxing and policing power to an agency that's self-appointed. We want them to be elected. And vague promises were made while hands are being waved, but no sign whatsoever of transitioning to anything like that. And seeing as how people now are in a big stew over paying the huge replenishment fee, which is going to be followed if the current plan is held to, is going to be followed by something that's 3 to 4 times that much. They're not gonna like it. But there's been no movement. There's been no acceptance of the fact that needs to be done.
Thank you so much for raising that, and you are right. We did hear that. I had it listed in our discussion under governance, and the structure of the Groundwater Authority was a topic that we did hear quite a bit about. That the tension with that particular item has to do with the legal structure of SGMA. I'm really glad you put that back in the room, though, because that is something that should be discussed, and I appreciate you.
Specific ideas on how to do that, and it's not hard.
Okay, and so he's offering that he has some specific ideas that could do that. Thank you for doing that. Does anybody else have something that I've missed, I've misunderstood? Yes.
I came in late, so just can you talk about the collaboration with the groups? I came in a little bit late. Did you touch on the collaboration issue that I know some of the groups that met with you discussed?
I don't think I understand what you're asking.
There was some concern about lack of collaborating with other.
There
Did you
was,
talk about?
So what we described and what we did find was that many people felt that there needed to be a lot more collaboration, a lot more conversation. That is something that was one of our findings, and different processes were offered for that, but they weren't effective in terms of the people who were receiving them, and so that's something you definitely could move forward with. We did find, though, in the findings that there are opportunities for collaboration and things that could be done. Yeah, of course, yes. Anybody else? Really important that we be corrected, or if we miss something, that we not do that. So, okay. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Judy Decker. I have a comment that I think you should include. And you're talking about collaborative meetings and so on and so forth. The Groundwater Authority, for all of its faults, has public meetings. They have 2 public committees, a policy advisory committee and a technical advisory committee. They both have public meetings. The water district has public meetings. The city has public meetings. I'm not going to talk about the county meetings because they're not here. I'm vice president of the Eastern Kern County Resource Conservation District, a public agency. We have public meetings. The amount of participation by the public at any of these meetings is abysmal. Mm-hmm. And you can talk about collaboration, but if the public doesn't make the effort to inform themselves and come to a meeting, all the meetings held in this room are I don't want to say televised, but I don't know what the right word is, as are the water district meetings. So the public in this valley is going to have to take it as their self-responsibility to get informed.
So we have a saying in my world, it's called living in two worlds. So everything that you just said is correct. That all the words that you just shared with all of us, the fact that these meetings are occurring, the fact that there have been a number of different processes, that is absolutely the case. And how people understand the processes, how they understand how to access them, how they experience the barriers to be able to participate in them, there is a gap between that. So there's a need to get that gap filled, and that's one of the findings from this. So it's not to diminish everything that you just said. I think it's important that you said it. And also, other people are experiencing a lack of access for a variety of reasons. And that could just even be the time of day of a meeting, or the physical ability to, like we just talked about a minute ago, standing 3 deep at a podium and how I feel about talking in that kind of a format. So just finding different ways for people to be able to come to the table. And you also shared correctly that there is a need for the community to be more educated and think really intentionally about how we can get that education into the mix and broadcast it out. I'm really pleased the newspaper's here right now. And so there are people here in the community that are able to actually help do that. So finding ways to have that happen and that are more effective. Thank you, Judy. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm Don Decker. I'm a member of the TAC. One thing that needs to be added to your list of communities with concern, there's more than just Cyril's Valley community or Inyokern or small mutuals. There is the entire community of small wells.
The domestics.
Many of those wells are owned by people with, limited resources, and there's far more of those folks than anything else. Most of the wells in this valley, in fact, are domestic wells.
That's great. Thank you. And I did not have that flagged, so that's a great add. Thank you.
And the Judy's comments about lack of public participation. One thing that I have noticed as someone who tried to organize the domestic well community was that after a few months, many people were basically pulling back into themselves in spite of constant updates and reminders to come to meetings. And
so once again, starting to rethink what does it look like, right, when we're in these conversations, and how do we get the right people in the room? So that's great to put in the mix. I'm going to flag that, though. I didn't, Dawn. I did not have the domestics flagged, so I'm going to elevate that for that. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm not seeing, once again, for me, what was important was that you all felt adequately and accurately represented in the comments. Do we have anything online, Emily, of anybody that wants to add something?
We do. We just got a comment from Edward B. He was curious about if there were statistics about overall water usage and the aquifer status or reserve amount.
So that would be a question I could not answer, but that is a question that could be answered. So so that would speak to, I think, the question that we talked about, where there's technical information that is available or that can be shared, and making sure that that becomes available to people. So thank you, Edward, for the question. Was there anything else, Emily?
No, I think I would just add to that piece that there is information, Edward, that we can direct you to in terms of the status. And he actually shared his email, so we can make sure we can get those resources to you, Edward.
So for the people in the room, Emily's voice is just like appearing out of, like, I told her she was kind of reminding of me that movie, you know, where that God voice that comes down and
Oz in the back.
she's the Wizard of Oz. She's sitting right there in that room. And I swear that's true. I can make her show herself for all that. Okay, so we wanted to let you talk. I've talked enough already. So let's go to the next. What we're going to do, we've got some information. I've got handouts. I'll have Dawn help me get these out. And Emily, for those of you who are online, Emily has these as well. We're going to have you sit and give us some additional feedback on some specific items. So I just raised a couple of things that were kind of these top-of-line, high-level conversations. We would like your assistance in helping us dig into it. So our next step, the next thing that would be happening, is we would be going back to the parties that would be making decisions about this. So this would be like the Water District and the city and the Groundwater Authority, and saying, we think there's some room here for some conversations to continue this, to maybe get things in a little better shape for the community. And if that's the case, here's some things that we've heard to deep dive into some of these top line priorities. So what we're going to do is we're going to have everybody kind of move around a little bit and find some other folks to talk to, and I'll help organize that in a minute. When you get into the group, I'm just going to ask a couple people to help us out with this. So somebody's going to be in charge of just making sure everybody gets a chance to talk, and somebody agrees that they'll jot down some notes. We've got extra pens if you need them. Somebody agrees that they'll report it out, what was said. And then everybody just kind of keeps track of the time. So that's the basics. When you're in your small group, the conversations, there's something here called ground rules. So just have good conversational electronics courtesy. So that's the stuff like probably your mom told you to act right when you're in meetings or talking to people. So you probably don't need more instructions about that. No requirement. Oh, this is really important. You do not have to defend any of your ideas. Your ideas are your ideas, and other people actually don't get to argue with them. Your idea is your idea. You don't need to advocate for it, nor do you need to agree with anything anybody else says in the group. Just listen so you can get all the points of view so we can share them, keep track of the time, and humor is welcome and important, just shouldn't be at somebody else's expense. So those are the ground rules. So moving into the next page. So these are the themes that we heard, and you heard me talk about them a little bit. Oh, look at that. Don's got pens and everything. Okay. These are some of the things that people talk to us about, and so here's some questions that we'd like you to respond to in your group. To what extent were you surprised about the assignment or the assessment so far, which you heard what we've been sharing, and what, if anything, would you want to add or subtract? Some of you've already been doing that, but if there was something else you wanted to add, you can do that. Then we want you to go ahead. So we've just finished the first one. We've finished the question 1 and 2. So when you get into your small group, though, go ahead and introduce yourself. Some of you already know each other. And if you would, pick one place in the Tri-County area, that is Kern, Inyo, and San Bernardino, that you have a good memory about. Now, here's the hard thing with this particular assignment. You just have to say the name of the place. You don't get to share what the memory was. We might have time to go back to the memory, but you'll have to just, I'm looking at you. You got that instruction? All right. Okay. All right. So just go ahead. We'll just get I want people to get a sense of the place. We're talking about a place where people live. And then working with your topic, what would a potential community conversation look like? What kinds of subtopics or priorities would you want to have addressed if we were going to dive into that? So Judy, you were just talking about this a minute ago. Like Judy was talking about communication, and she was saying, hey, we've got all these meetings. She'd want to talk a little bit more about that. And then who else would need to be involved? involved. Also, the types of things that would be happening, if this topic, if the thing that we took on was working well, how would we know that we'd been successful? What is it you'd be looking for that would show there'd been a successful process? So, take a look. There's also one little question on the back. This is for the note taker, just to jot down the notes. You're going to have to summarize what the people in your group said. So, let me get a sense of some things that people are interested in talking about. How many people in the room would kind of want to talk about communications and transparency as a topic to focus on? So, over here, okay. So I'm going to put you two in charge of that. And, right. Anyone that would like to talk about that topic, come hang out with these two. I think they're in good hands, probably. So I'm done. This is a lot of faith on my part. I'm looking here for clues. If I made a mistake, is everybody telling me it's okay? All right. Let's go to the next group. So equity would be another one, equity and smalls. So you'll take that one on. Could you, do you want to kind of grab a spot? For that. So anybody who wants to talk about that, come hang out here. All right, who would be interested in talking about, and let's put the needs of the smalls and the domestics with that one, okay? How about the best available science? Who's interested in talking about that? Dawn? All right. So if you want to talk about that, come hang out with Dawn. Yes.
I also want to say that the domestic well owners ought to have their own group.
Okay. So if that group gets too big, we'll split them up, okay? All right. All right. Who wants to talk about other management actions? Okay. These guys do. All right. I'm putting you in charge of that. Okay. All right. So everyone's going to have to kind of get up, move, go hang out with some other people. This is part of this collaboration business. This is where we actually start talking to other people.
Hey, Lisa, before we jump for
Yes.
our online folks, I am going to momentarily move you into breakout rooms.
Okay.
You will need to accept your breakout room in order to be transitioned. For our folks that are watching on YouTube, you will be cut off from the audio while we're in this breakout group portion of tonight's meeting. We will come back into the main room around 7:15. So feel free to step away and you can come back around 7:15 for our full group report out. And Lisa, if you can mute your mic, that would be great.
Okay, the groups should start wrapping up about now. Make sure you got your report. Um, if you are still chatting away and need another topic, you could find out why people pick that place, what the actual memory was.
Well, we've already disbanded.
You've already disbanded. You can reconvene. You've got leadership potential. All right. We're going to start reconvening here in about 5 minutes. Reports. Yeah.
You're always good to hear.
Okay, it's time. Time for the reports. All right. We had a willing volunteer for the first group. Yeah, all the other volunteers may or may not be willing, but this one was a willing volunteer. So.
That's right. Where's Chuck? Chuck was our facilitator.
Okay, and you're going to have to keep that just a little closer for the online.
I forget every time.
Yeah.
You would think I would know.
Kind of go with your inner rock star. Just the.
All right, you guys ready?
Oh, there you go.
All right, there we are.
There you go.
All right, so we ended up with number 6, other projects and management actions of community discussion. I think Chuck was voluntold on that one. You were. So we drilled through, and I am definitely looking if somebody, like if you want to stop me and say we did something wrong, please stop as I go. Number 1, to what extent you were surprised about the assessment found? Generally, we said there was no surprise there. What, if anything, would you add, subtract, or change on the list? And we had some input. Exploration. Chuck, I think that was yours. Judy, RCD, where you at? Judy, there you are. And Mike, you said you would like added special elected district for the Groundwater Authority. And there was some other notes there. But you want me just to drill through?
Well, you're in charge of. You've got about 4-minute report, so keep going. We've got to.
On to number 3. Introductions. We all seem to know each other. That worked out pretty well. Then, well, I mean, that's right. Yeah. I'm gonna.
That was a good qualifier.
It was. I'm trying to hold back my smart aleck remarks. And so Chuck, he said at least one place that a memory was from Burroughs. So we're gonna leave that there.
All righty.
All right. On to number 4, working with the assigned topic, discuss what a potential community conversation about this topic. So these last few are where we got into the meat of it. Discuss what a potential community conversation about this topic would look like. A, what subtopics or priorities would need to be addressed? Other projects and management, we went into policy for growth. Where is he at? There you are. Policy for growth, policy for imported water, reclaimed water, exploration of the subbasin, brackish water, so these lists went long, so my bullets, agricultural ramp down, discussion of fallowing, storage and recharge, fusion of water district wells to reduce the cone of depression. So these are all subtopics and priorities that that the group thought needed to be addressed. And then we went on to who would need to be involved. The very first thing Mike was saying was everybody, and in a town hall method. So everybody needs to be a part of the conversation. So then we tried to refine that a little bit. Who else? COSO, Cyril's, Inyakern CSD, the city, the Groundwater Authority, the Water District. And if I missed anybody, did I miss anybody?
It almost looks like the group of people we interviewed then.
Yep, just like that. On number 5, describe what types of things would be happening if things related to this topic were working well. You asked us to dig down deep. How would you measure success? So Judy said that suggestions should be given to the GA and heard, and that we should all be working together with common sense.
I used to have a teacher that used to say, the common sense is rarely common.
I'm going to hold my comments. Less community strife, right? Chuck was saying that. I said, the elected officials could be more open and talking. I think that we've done that off and on, but for one reason or another, that's stopped. And I think that all of your elected officials could be talking a whole lot more in a very public way. If things was working, we would have water. The basin would be sustainable. Resources being pooled. Chuck was bringing that up. We could, if everybody was working together in one direction, then our resources could be being pooled. Wells that are going dry, they could be being mitigated correctly. And trust of public officials would be there. And that's a summary of the group.
Very good, thank you. Is anybody in the group want to add to what he said? Can we express appreciation to this group for their effort? Okay, so in terms of the digging deep, one thing for the priorities, this little QR code thing, if you're not used to this, let me know and we can make sure to send you an email. But this is to a survey, and we're asking people to do some priorities on those management actions. So that was a pretty long list. That would be really helpful to start talking about how we might want to triage that a little bit. So this is something, by the way, this survey, you can share this with others that aren't in the meeting tonight.
Lisa, can I also just add, if we have our note takers, if they could share their notes with us, we would love that.
That would be great. So Rihanna is right here, and that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, Judy.
I don't recall that he said it, but we did say that on the management list, we should start with the things that can be done quickly.
The low-hanging fruit, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right, who's my second willing volunteer? Okay, I see eye movement, so that's always a clue. Here you go.
Gosh darn it. I guess I'll stand up. Hold on. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Dr. Heyman. I so appreciate that. Most of you guys know who I am. I'm Regina. I'm a Toronto resident. So group number 2 had equity and the small communities such as Trona, Inyoker, and CSD, and then the small domestic well owners. So I don't think I can't remember his name now. I am so sorry. I'm not going to read out the questions. I'll just go by the numbers to try and make it a little bit faster.
Well, it will help the others if you say the questions. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can do either one, so whichever. I talk really fast, so I apologize now. So number 1, to what extent were you surprised about what the assessment found? We kind of had a consensus of all 4 parties in my group that we were not surprised at all. And that kind of stayed consistent throughout. Number 2, what, if anything, would you add, subtract, or change on this list, which list above? The 2 pieces that kind of came up were adding domestic well owners to the small community equity issues like Trona and Inyoker and CSD because they share many commonalities with us.
That was a really good call. Thank you.
Yeah, and then potentially adding them to the small mutuals because I myself couldn't remember what the definition was of that. And then the other one had to do with the data information, the science of maybe potentially we have too much of it now. And need to kind of start paring it down and actually drilling down on the data and having one voice with the data rather than many voices, and having the most accurate data. So number 3 are introductions. I knew 2 of them. I did not know Mr. O'Gara. I hope I didn't butcher that. We were pretty evenly spread out. I'm a Toronto resident. Dr. Heyman is from City of Ridgecrest. Mr. O'Gara was from, he's a domestic well owner, and then Audrey is Cyril's Domestic Water Company. So kind of spread out amongst most of the primary groups that we were talking about. And oddly enough, our places that we have memories were Valley Wells, the Pinnacles, Indian Wells Canyon, and Mountain Springs Canyon. So very, very different kind of situation going on there. For working with the assigned topic, discuss what a potential community conversation about this topic would look like. So with having equity in small communities, it's a very difficult topic when you're talking about equity and how to kind of handle that. One of them that we kind of came up with is town halls is really not the appropriate word for it, but we couldn't think of anything else, the best way to describe it. Informal kind of town halls with these particular communities, just them.
In place, yeah.
With decision makers at the table. So that is like the key thing is having, the GA members or, somebody who's actually making decisions in the conversation to actually be able to address community concerns kind of on the fly of, yeah, we can look into that, or no, that's not possible, and kind of get some of these answers. The other one that got discussed was adding, either an elected seats for these communities or non-voting member seats on the primary GA board. Of course, then the question is, would the committee then become too big? Because then everybody's going to want one, which makes sense. But as we kind of drilled down on it, a question that kind of came up was, how would we then subsidize for those who can't afford the water increases, things like that. So we kind of, we got a little in the weeds on some of this.
It's okay. Yeah.
And then number 5, describe what types of things would be happening if things related to this topic were working well. How would you measure success? So we kind of came up with 4 that seemed pretty common. There would be fewer questions from the community regarding these issues. Social media postings and conversations and dialogue would be a lot calmer and more collaborative. Fragmentation in information would definitely be less, so communication would be better and there would be public trust. And then just the overall fear in general would be significantly reduced, if not completely mitigated. And that's kind of what we got.
Thank you. I want to just make note of one of the conversations we did go out to Trona, and something that really stuck with me was there was fear, just a fear of what happens to this place that I care about and that I love, and all of that, and what that brought to the table. What makes it very difficult sometimes to have conversations. So just kind of keeping that front and present. But thank you for bringing that word into the room.
Yeah. With Inyokern's expressing the same things, I hear a lot from them. So not having that fear, being able to have a reasonable conversation. Because when you're in a fear mode, you're not going to have a reasonable conversation. So that's what we got.
Thank you, Regina. All righty, let's give this group a hand. All right. Do I have another willing volunteer somewhere? All right. I see one right here. Look at that. All right. Like this. He's even got a little pep in his step.
Yeah, that's not indicative of anything that's about to happen here. And I made a clipboard out of this deal, so.
I was like, this is like a person. This was pretty cool. Look at this. It's like, I saw him. I'm like, dude, how did you know to bring a clipboard?
This is Skip. He's all prepared.
Dang, I want you in all my groups. All right.
He's extremely prepared.
Wow.
Always.
Okay.
All right. So we did bounce around a little bit, but we were communications, and we probably ventured into all of the topics at one point or another, which it seems that all of the groups did. So kudos to everyone. To what extent were you surprised about what the assessment found? Just like everybody else, not surprised at all. That was uniform throughout the group. Everybody pretty much expected what we saw. What, if anything, would you add, subtract, or change on the list? And here we went a little bit off topic and not directly related to the list, but we had a discussion about the survey itself, and it said the response to the survey was not good. I mean, and this is not the first part of the survey, but when you went public with it. And I think that was pretty consistent, that we didn't get good feedback. It said low participation, and the word disappointed in participation came up. Groups are missing, so there are complete groups of people that are not even weighing in on the topic. That's a problem in our community, and then along that same line, need more ratepayer perspective, and how do we draw the ratepayer in? And so that led to another conversation, which said that the costs of our plan and the other steps that we might be considering associated with the plan need to be added into the public discussion. And so maybe that would be something we would want to add to the list. We are also concerned that information from users to decision makers was not properly or consistently considered, and we wonder, where did that information go? How was it conveyed and considered? Not to say that it wasn't considered. It just the feedback mechanism may not have been as good as it could have been. Okay. All right. So introductions. We had a fairly diverse group.
Your group was pretty big, so I'm going to let you skip over that
all right,
one.
thank
and
you.
then check with him after the meeting.
Yeah.
But there was a couple of eye openers.
In the group? Yes.
Just saying.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So, but I do want to say the great memories spread around really well. Ridgecrest, obviously popular. A bit in Kernville, Kennedy Meadows. So, very
Yeah,
clear
but
that
you're
people-
representing for Inyo.
Yes. Well, I work in Inyo, but I live here, and I live here for a reason because I love it here too. So there you go. All right. So moving on to question 4, working with the assigned topic, discuss what a potential community conversation about this topic would look like. And our topic, obviously, we picked on communication transparency, and basically throughout the process, all sides have presented arguments. That's what we're looking for. But we feel like the public doesn't have a full understanding of. Wow. Can you read that? Of the legality. Who wrote this stuff down? I do need those, yes. Of the legalities that the decision makers are having to work within. And so I think that limits some of the public interaction back. And so there has to be some recognition of that, and maybe we can do a better job of making people understand why those limitations are in place.
And that's the kind of thing that's fixable.
Absolutely.
So with that kind of a feedback, then that's something you can take back and actually fix.
Right, and you're going to hear that from me a bunch of times. It's what I consistently heard was feedback, lack of feedback, and I think that solves a lot of ills. It doesn't necessarily solve the problems, but it does solve a bit of the anger issues that I think a lot of people in the community are feeling. So, but we'll get into that a little bit more, hopefully. All right, I'm going to need those glasses. I'm kidding. I'm sorry.
Got some right there.
And then we talked about the. Again, we're back on the cost. The source of the science was questioned, meaning who really decided and why did they pick which model and because again you talked about too much data maybe being out there. The engineer in me somewhere deep inside of me says you can never have enough data, but to that end. I also work in a power plant, and the worst thing that you can have is two transmitters on the same piece of equipment, and then you wonder which one's right. So there's a bit of a dilemma there. Yeah. But anyway, what I think we were talking about is how did we decide which science we were going to use?
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's a transparency piece. Yeah.
Yes, and then how.
I just happen to have this in my hand.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that's worse. No, I'm just kidding. How was replenishment money being used? There has been little communication about how that money is being used and what we're allowed to do with that. And that led to discussion on fiscal accountability. And then I think the big one was that the models are not made available to the public, and the public, if they had the resources to run those models, are not allowed to run their own scenarios. Again, with requests that were put in through both the PAC, TAC, GA, frequently there were either minimal response or no response to some of the questions that were put in. And then there was, I've got bullets here, 7 lawsuits going on right now. And
so what does it look like when it works?
So that's where we're going next.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds broken, so tell me what it looks like.
Yeah, that's item 5. Right?
Okay,
Are you reading my list?
I'm with you. I'm with
All
you.
right. So So if it works, the model's public, full transparency. Everybody's able to have a discussion about the results that they find and what the inputs were, et cetera. More responses to comments, more dialogue, more public involvement. Written comments need to be returned. Agendas put out far in advance instead of one day in advance. The pack and tack input would need to be clearly demonstrated that it was taken into account. So, and that is pretty much the extent of my list. I have a big empty box on the back, but we talked about all of the things that we talked about before. And but the biggest thing that we came up with, and I've heard this from both groups, we need a central medium for communications. And whatever that is, whether it's, wow. They work good up close, but man, when I start looking at the crowd, I'm getting a little seasick here. Thank you, Chuck. Whatever that medium is, and again, I think that's maybe something you put out to the public, but we're going to have to get the public trust in order to get public involvement. And so we got our work cut out for us, all of us do.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's thank this group. All right, so there's one group left.
I don't want to forget about our online group, our small but mighty online group.
We'll get the online group too. We've got one room in. All right.
So we're one group, but we are actually two groups. We have the domestic well owners who are folded in. So with your patience and forbearance, I'll go through domestic well owners and then the science. So let's see. First, you will be surprised that none of us were surprised by the assessment. And what would we add or subtract to the list? We would add addressing the needs of the domestic well owners to the list. Right, very good. So I'm David St. Amand. Mr. Paul Nugent was in our team. Burnell Blanchard, Lyle Fisher retired, and Dr. Don Decker. Moving on, domestic well owners. Working with the assigned topic, what would a potential conversation about the topic look like? What subtopics and priorities would be addressed first for the domestic well owners, providing info tailored to the domestic well owners? And then the sub-question to that is, how do you get that information to them? But it would be very helpful for them. Item B, who would need to be involved? The representatives of the community, of the domestic well owners. We have to find some way to encourage them to at least pick a couple of people to go forward and represent them as a group, then take the information back. Topic 5, describe what types of things would be happening if things related to the topic were working well. Well, first of all, we'd be able to define who was in the domestic well community by, as best we could, locating them and locating their distribution across the valley.
Just so you all know, that is a problem in a lot of the basins I'm working in, just even knowing who the people are, and because of the way that some of the registries and things have happened. And there's been several sub-basins that have had to move forward with actually convening specialized outreach just for that group. So it's not just your basin.
Right, thank you. Let's see, we'd like to see, for the domestic well owners, increased participation in the process. Tied to that is, how do we incentivize them to make themselves known and to come forward to participate in the project? We'd like to be able to gather well data and well behavior data and that sort of thing. And that's it for the domestic well owners. For the science, did you have a question?
No, keep going.
Questions, comments, additions?
Yeah. Keep going with science.
All right, so go to the science. Discuss what a potential community conversation about the topic looked like. A, what subtopics or priorities to be addressed. So recharge levels would be addressed, and we'd like to know what the water and storage is like. There's some dispute over both of those numbers. We'd like to know more about the possibilities of using brackish water in the community. And item B, who would need to be involved? Really, it's it's everybody, but the highlights were, at a minimum, the United States Navy, the Water District, Searles Valley Minerals, and some representatives from the farming community. So describe what types of things would be happening if things were working. What is success? So for the best science, a good group working on the science. By that is meant that they don't have an axe to grind. There is nonpartisan, and I don't mean that politically, but nonpartisan as possible. All right, some neutrality.
Yeah.
Let's see. They have the GSP model made available, and I think that was covered by a couple of different groups. That's critical. The model and the assumptions that went into it and the data as well, so people can take a look at that and find some confidence in the conclusions that were determined. And finally, reach a comfortable technical consensus on the level of recharge and the level of storage. And by comfortable, that means after the conversation, nobody is yelling at anybody. People are generally okay with the results. It doesn't have to be an exact consensus, but they're, all for it, I hate it. But we want all for it, or I'll live with it.
Yeah, I can live with it.
Right, and that is the report.
Thank you. That's an excellent report. Let's thank this group. Thank you.
I wasn't actually bowing. I was about to trip over the
I was there with you. All right, Emily, if this is the voice from on high, tell us what the online group had to say.
This is Oz here coming in. We had quite a diverse group. So those that can't see, we originally had 18 folks online listening into the conversation. Some folks had some technical difficulties getting into the breakout groups, but of the folks we had some state agency representatives who were interested in discussing, and we're happy to see that we had groundwater dependent ecosystems on the list. There were also some community members in our group who were very new to this conversation, and we're here to just learn about what it is we were discussing today, and had a lot to say in terms of education and communication. So on to the assigned topics and what rose to the top for this group. The first was the topic of imported water, and some of the subtopics there. There was a desire for emphasis on understanding if water will be banked, and if there is banked water, what the benefits to groundwater dependent ecosystems would be. And if there is imported water, what the water rights considerations are, what the costs are, where it's being imported from. There was a concern that there's an over-reliance on importing water from declining surface water supplies. So understanding why that solution is advancing and how others should also are being considered. The topic of education and transparency was a big topic of discussion for this group. Again, as I mentioned, there were some folks who were relatively new to this discussion and here to learn. There was a desire for more regular communication through newsletters, online billings from the Water District was how one member of our group heard about tonight's meeting. And just an eagerness to better understand. A lot of the web information is overwhelming, as some community members shared. So having easily digestible information would really be helpful. One priority that actually was not on our list, or was, but kind of incorporated in other, was the understanding and addressing the needs of water haulers. So we had two gentlemen in our breakout group who were either currently hauling water or considering hauling water. And there were concerns about the costs for them, securing a long-term source for water hauling, and really better understanding the needs of water haulers. I thought that was a great recommendation to call out in our list. And then the last topic we talked about was groundwater dependent ecosystems. There's currently some surveying underway with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and state parks to understand the impacts to groundwater dependent ecosystems, particularly in Red Rock Canyon, but also more broadly in some of the public lands. So understanding how those findings could inform the protection of groundwater dependent ecosystems, and making sure that, they're just starting this process, but their intent is to make that part of the public record and include that as part of the discussion. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to have a groundwater dependent ecosystem focused conversation. And then the last piece, which kind of ties back to information sharing, as was discussed from other groups, there have been some stories from the community about wells going dry and the need for increased water hauling. There's a sense that the basin is being overpumped, but it's not clear where the wells are going dry, how to track wells going dry, and where well owners should go if they have concerns. So that was also a topic. On to question 5. What would things look like if this process were to be successful? For imported water, the topic was having more readily available information on what the proposed imported water project is and a clear understanding of the surface water availability of the proposed imported water project. On the education and transparency topic, that would just be a more clear, transparent communications and clarity from the community on where to go and who to go to for information. On addressing the needs of water haulers, if that were to be successful, there'd be a clear understanding of how to contact this group and how a better understanding of the costs of water hauling, if water rates are reflective of domestic use versus higher volume water haulers. There's a desire for some to get connected to the water district on water hauling. So Don, expect an email from me soon. And then the last piece on groundwater dependent ecosystems. If that were to be successful, there'd be a clear way to measure a positive or negative impact on groundwater dependent ecosystems and more long-term data gathering and monitoring. So quite a diverse group discussion that we had. It seems like there's a lot of overlap with some of the groups and also some unique voices that we had on the phone. And apologies, I was the stenographer for the other groups and taking notes, but I can't type and talk at the same time, so you don't see those up on screen.
Thank you, Emily. All right, let's thank the group online. Okay, so we're going to take all of the information that you gave us tonight, and we're going to be rolling it into some potential topics for collaboration. For those of you who did take notes, if you could give them to Rihanna, she'd greatly appreciate that. And that will help us with our larger note-taking. The next steps for this would be to go, I'll go ahead, I think I have this on the slide. Let's see here. Okay. So the options for collaboration right now would be topic-specific discussions, where we would go in and have very structured conversations about specific things. So with regards, so one of the things that we just heard a little bit earlier was this idea of, I think this came from your group report, there are things that are happening that can be fixed, and to actually sit down and say, okay, what does that look like? How would we do that? Have that in a very structured way to move through that. With the science, there is a little bit of a tension there because of the litigation. I think the thing with that will be to figure out, and working with the attorneys to figure out what is the space that is workable or doable in that context. In terms of the equity conversations, there's some real things that can be done there, getting that better data about where the domestic wells are, figuring out how to get out to those communities, working with the agencies that potentially might be able to help the communities that are really at risk. So like Trona, like Inyo Kern, some of the others. The water haulers, I think, is another group of folks that might be part of that. They potentially could be a really good source of information. So getting those conversations separate and apart, and actually just starting to work through some of the hard stuff, coming up with some criteria. Another thing that we saw was that a portfolio approach probably would be something that could be considered here. So sitting down in terms of moving forward and saying, here's some packages of things. This group, when you were talking, this group in this corner was talking about, hey, there's some low-hanging fruit. There's some things that could be done a little bit faster, maybe more economical. Can we get that on the road? Start getting some things going on that people feel like there's some movement. Those are all things that we know would really help from a collaboration standpoint. This openness in the public meetings, one of the things that we wanted to do today was have a different conversation where you actually got to feel like somebody was listening to you, and they were, and that was a conversation you actually could have. It wasn't just a point counterpoint, but actually a way of really diving into it. So finding more ways to have that happen. And then finally, expanded outreach and engagement. There's some stuff we're just not doing right. You know, this room isn't full. And so there's something, we're not doing something right. And then we got to figure out what that is. I think we've got some different ideas about how to do that, but that's a larger conversation to work with everybody on. So those would be some of the things that we would offer, some options. Work with the Groundwater Authority, work with the city, work with the counties, work with the water district to say, hey, is there room here to move? How do you all feel about that? That has to be a decision of the community. That is not our decision. I just have to have enough confidence that it is useful and worth your time so that you're not wasting your time, and I'm also not wasting the state's resources. So that would be the kind of point for us, you know, after those conversations. And
Lisa, just
yes.
before we get to next steps, I think you skipped a slide on defining success. If you want to go back to...
Well, that was what everybody was doing. They were defining.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the things the group responded. Here's some things we found. Thank you, Emily. The shared understanding of the problem. So I think this actually came up tonight in this conversation, that there really is a divergence of ideas about what the actual problem is and where it is. So really getting some better definition. One of the gentlemen I talked to a little bit earlier was saying, hey, you know, if we were in a mediation, we'd be sitting down, kind of work through some stuff. The problem definition is the first thing you've got to get right. Otherwise, you're not working on the right stuff. The next one is the transparency consensus on moving forward, and then really making sure the community is heard. That is a critical element. Okay, next steps, and I'm mindful of time. Right now, we are in discussions to go present to the PAC through the Groundwater Authority. We had heard there was an interest in moving forward with that. Some of the things that I heard even tonight was perhaps some of the comments that we have might be helpful to the PAC with that, and so we'll plan on doing that. We'll also now have the benefit of all of this conversation we can take into that meeting. So the things that you did today, we will use again. We'll use that in our report to the PAC, as well as the other types of things that we do when we talk to the state. And so that's kind of the game plan for that. And I think is that my last slide, Emily? Yep, it is. So we want to thank you. I apologize for going 11 minutes over. I like to end on time. Dawn, did you have any comments, swan song, any?
I want to hear the swan song.
No, I just made it around each of the groups, and I thought the conversations were really quite thought-provoking, and the results obviously were something we were looking forward to hearing on the topics. I thought everybody did a great job. And as a reward, if you didn't get a free water district pen as a parting gift,
right.
Feel free.
And if you know somebody, we're going to go ahead and get this code out for if you know somebody that you'd like to have answer the questions we answered tonight, feel free to take this. We can email it to you as well, but this is still open, and we'll try to get that compiled before the October meeting. So I would like to again thank everybody who was here. Could you all give yourselves a big hand just for... Have a great rest of your evening. We'll be able to hang around a little bit if you have any more questions.